Hi everyone, I'm recording this just before the PCC AI group on cataloging, where we'll talk with smart folks that know more about cataloging than I do. In the meantime, though, I've been meaning to get to this paper on chain of thought monitorability, a new and fragile opportunity for AI safety, and I got a little carried away maybe color coding this, but the blue are the UK AI Security Institute folks. The red are OpenAI, the orange are Anthropic, the yellow are Google DeepMind, and I was trying to also figure out who else was nonprofit, but then I kind of stopped because the rest of these are not too many people. But you can see it's the big vendors writing this lovely thing. So AI systems that think in human language offer a unique opportunity for AI safety. We can monitor their chains of thought for the intent to misbehave. Like all other known AI oversight methods, chain of thought monitoring is imperfect and allows some misbehavior to go unnoticed. Nevertheless, it shows promise, and we recommend further research into chain of thought monitorability and investment in chain of thought monitoring alongside existing safety methods. Because chain of thought monitorability may be fragile, we recommend that frontier models consider the impact development decisions on chain of thought monitorability, which I don't feel like is a word, but there you are. Okay, a unique safety opportunity. So, the opacity of advanced AI agents underlies many of their potential risks, risks that would become more tractable if AI developers could interpret these systems. Because LLMs natively process and act through human language, one might hope they are easier to understand than other approaches to AI. Yes, someone that's always struggled with language, that's debatable. The discovery of chain of thought bolstered this hope, prompting models to think out loud improves their capabilities while also increasing the proportion of relevant computation that happens in natural language. However, chain of thoughts resulting from prompting a non-reasoning language model are subject to the same selection pressures to look helpful and harmless as any other model output, limiting their trustworthiness. In contrast, reasoning models are explicitly trained to perform extended reasoning in chain of thought before taking actions or producing final outputs. In these systems, chain of thoughts can serve as latent variables in the model's computation. During the reinforcement learning phase of training, these latents are treated largely the same as activations. They are not directly supervised, but are optimized indirectly by their contribution in leading the model to a highly rewarded final answer. Accordingly, just like activations, they may contain information that outputs are explicitly rewarded against displaying, such as intent to misbehave. This offers a unique opportunity for AI safety chain of thought monitoring. A chain of thought monitor is an automated system that reads the chain of thought of a reasoning model and other relevant information and flags suspicious or potentially harmful interactions. These responses could then be blocked or replaced with safer actions or reviewed in more depth. Maybe that's the filtering going on with Microsoft Azure right now. More generally, by studying the chain of thought, we can gain some insight into how our AI agents think and what goals they have. Chain of thought is not a panacea, just as a model's activations at a particular layer do not represent the entire reasoning process behind a model's prediction. Chain of thought reasoning traces are incomplete representations or eventually drift from natural language. However, chain of thought does not need to completely represent the actual reasoning process in order to be a valuable additional safety layer and, with careful interpretation, to shed light on the AI reasoning process. There are two key reasons why chain of thoughts may be monitorable. Anyway, necessity to think out loud. On some tasks, models need to externalize their reasoning because they are unable to complete the task without chain of thought. If models continue reasoning in natural language and if the behaviors that pose the most severe risk require extended reasoning, this fact could enable reliable detection of egregious misbehavior. Good theory. Propensity to think out loud. In cases where models do not strictly need to use chain of thought to accomplish a task, they may still have a tendency to externalize their reasoning, much like me talking to myself all day long. While not generally robust, monitoring that relies on propensity can still notice misbehavior that would be otherwise undetected. Thinking out loud is necessary for hard tasks. So, while AI systems can pose a wide variety of risks, the more severe risks typically require advanced capabilities. Even without any safety mitigations, current AI systems are unlikely to be able to carry out sophisticated cyber attack, or exfiltrate their own weights without being noticed. At the point where AI systems are capable of causing these harms, they will likely be leveraging sophisticated planning and reasoning capabilities. I think they're almost there. I don't know. Between this and seeing some of the robotics coming out, I just worry so much. A key requirement for such capabilities is working memory, a storage system for intermediate reasoning outputs that allows for further reasoning and manipulation of the stored information. In the popular transformer architecture that underlies nearly all frontier AI systems, any sufficiently long chain of serial steps of cognition must pass through chain of thought at some point, as illustrated in Figure 1. From a theoretical perspective, this means that using chain of thought makes a transformer strictly more powerful. So we'll go back up here and look at the diagram. Le figure 1. So we have the chain of thought and then the computation behind the scenes to math. So long serial chains of cognition must pass through chain of thought. We visualize transformer architecture and highlight the flows of information through it during autoregressive sampling. We omit the residual skip connections for simplicity. The blue arrows represent the use of chain of thought as a form of a working memory. Chain of thought is the only way that information can flow down from layer to earlier layers. As a result, for a fixed amount of tokens, the longest flows of information must use the chain of thought, and many information flows are impossible without it. For example, there is no way for information to flow between the two highlighted nodes without using the chain of thought. You need to go down here and get carried up to there and then down there. Okay. I barely sort of maybe grasped that diagram, but that's okay. We're all still learning. Okay. Overall, this ensures that for tasks requiring a sufficient amount of serial reasoning, there exists information in the chain of thought that the AI system uses as part of its reasoning. This does not guarantee that we can understand that information. It is imaginable that the AI systems use the tokens to have completely different meanings that we are unable to decode, which would stymie most attempts at monitoring. Yes, that reminds me of when you see the two AIs talk to each other in their own little bit code language. It freaks me out every time I see it. It's like, oh, we're two AI assistants. Let's just talk to each other in our own little tongue. It's like, however, in practice, large language models learn a strong and natural language prior during pre-training, such that they tend to use chain of thought in a similar manner that humans use natural language. Thus, we believe current AI systems satisfy the externalized reasoning property. For sufficiently difficult tasks, transformers must use chain of thought as a form of working memory. By default, humans can understand the chain of thought. The externalized reasoning property does not guarantee monitorability, which I still think isn't a word. It states that only some reasoning appears in the chain of thought, but there may be other relevant reasoning that does not. It is thus possible that even for hard tasks, the chain of thought only contains benign-looking reasoning, while the incriminating reasoning is hidden. Yeah, because they're smarter than us, remember? In addition, the externalized reasoning property might not hold for future models. Therefore, as we discussed in Section 2, it is important to continuously evaluate monitorability of frontier models. Finally, it remains an open question whether the most serious harms in fact require difficult reasoning. While we think this is likely for many of the most severe risks, especially the ones that require planning ahead and avoiding detection, such as self-exfiltration or sabotage, not all dangerous actions will require reasoning to execute, especially as AI systems begin to be routinely trusted with more and more high-stakes tasks. Yeah, that is the fear. So chain of thought is often monitorable in practice. Chain of thought monitoring has already been useful for safety research in many ways. Detecting model misbehavior, so when models act in a misaligned way, for example, exploiting flaws in their reward functions during training, manipulating data to achieve an outcome, or falling prey to prompt injection attacks, they often explicitly say so in the reasoning traces, such as let's hack, let's sabotage, or I'm transferring money because the website instructed me to. This could allow chain of thought monitors to catch instances of misbehavior more effectively than monitoring only the model's actions. Discovering early signs of misalignment. So when models pretend to have desirable goals in pursuit of goals humans would disapprove of, this is often reflected in their chain of thought. Monitorable chain of thought could therefore afford an early insight into models' goals and motivations, even if the model takes no misaligned actions. You want to know what it's thinking, in case it goes evil on you. Noticing flaws in model evaluations. Evaluations of LLM agents are sometimes confounded by memorization or spurious failures, such as bugs in the agent scaffolding, tooling, and evaluation infrastructure. Moreover, models sometimes know they're being evaluated, which can affect how they behave. The joys of quantum life, kids. Reviewing reasoning traces can help AI developers notice when evaluations might not be reflective of deployment time behavior. It is unclear what proportion of the chain of thought monitorability demonstrated in these examples is due to the necessity versus the propensity for a model to reason out loud in the task considered. Future models may face incentives to hide their reasoning, which could override any natural propensity. For instance, a model might become aware its reasoning traces are being monitored, or an auxiliary training objective, such as a chain of thought length penalty, might cause a model to shortcut important reasoning steps. Even if a model's natural propensity to reason out loud is diminished, chain of thought monitoring may still provide a useful tool in detecting misbehavior in tasks difficult enough to necessitate chain of thought reasoning. Yeah, still keep an eye on the bot. Chain of thought monitorability may be fragile. Monitorability of the chain of thought of reasoning models could be contingent on the way frontier models are trained today. There are multiple ways in which chain of thought monitorability could be degraded. So there is a drift from legible chain of thought due to further scaling up in reinforcement learning. So, in the previous paradigm of pre-training followed by reinforcement learning from human feedback, nearly all optimization pressure came from data either generated or evaluated by humans. The reasoning model paradigm, relying heavily on outcome-based reinforcement learning, lacks this property and might no longer incentivize legibility, especially if compute devoted to reasoning training is scaled up significantly. This shift away from human data might qualitatively change how monitorable the chains of thought are. For example, earlier research suggests that language models fine-tuned with outcome-based rewards can drift away from legible English. Yep, once again, they'll just speak their own little language. Direct supervision of chain of thought. So when models are trained with pure outcome-based reinforced learning, they are only being rewarded for correct outputs regardless of how they arrive at them. Yeah, it's much like math class. Or how math class should be, as my father would say, because we used to get in a lot of trouble. We'd be like, why'd you teach her that? This means that their reasoning process is not subject to any optimization pressures other than helping lead to a correct answer. However, process supervision is an active area of research involving directly shaping the reasoning process, e.g. by making the chain of thought be shorter, valid reasoning steps adhere to a certain style, or not contain offensive content. Ding, 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 post-filtration. Such optimization might make this chain of thought less faithfully reflect how models arrive at their decisions, and that said, process supervision could also make the model reason in safer ways and enable supervision of hard-to-evaluate tasks. More research is needed to understand the trade-offs between its safety applications and its effect on chain of thought monitorability. Indirect optimization pressure on chain of thought. Even if reward is not directly computed from chain of thought, model training can still exert some optimization pressure on chains of thought. For example, if final outputs are optimized to look good to a preference model, this could put some pressure on the chain of thought leading up to these final outputs if the portion of the model's weights that generate the chain of thought are partially shared with those that generate the outputs, which is common in transformer architectures. Even more indirectly, if chain of thought is shown to humans who rate the LLM outputs, it might affect human preferences, which are then distilled into reward models used in chain of thought blind outcome-based training. Similarly, using chain of thought monitoring to identify and patch reward hacking vulnerabilities in training environments might put evolutionary pressure on chain of thought across multiple chaining levels. Novel architectures. LLMs are only capable of sophisticated multi-step reasoning when they use chain of thought, and this might stem from limitations of the transformer architecture. Researchers have recently explored changes to the model architectures that increase the serial depth of reasoning that models are capable of in a continuous latent space. Such latent reasoning models might not need to verbalize any of their thoughts and would thus lose the safety advantages chain of thought confers. Apologies if you hear my dog's collar dangling around. She got up, and I thought I needed to pause, and apparently not. So, AI researchers should study what makes models monitorable. Our understanding of chain of thought monitorability is still in its infancy, and there are many research questions that require answers before we can have confidence in chain of thought monitoring as a safety measure. How should chain of thought monitorability be evaluated? Researchers have proposed evaluations of faithfulness as a proxy measure for monitorability. However, these evaluations do not disambiguate the propensity versus the necessity of models to externalize their reasoning, and typically only consider simple question answering settings. Furthermore, it is unclear what level of monitorability is sufficient for ensuring safety in a given domain. Researchers should explore novel evaluations, those measuring monitorability directly, as well as those that target specific properties underlying monitorability. Examples include measures of chain of thought readability, for example, using another large language model to assess the clarity and coherence of chain of thoughts of a given agent. Capability evaluations of latent reasoning. These would assess how well LLMs can reason without externalizing, such as in a single forward pass, on a variety of reasoning-heavy and agenic tasks. Measures of causal relevance to chain of thoughts. For instance, this could involve perturbing a chain of thought and checking whether it influences the final output. A low rate of change could indicate the chain of thought is more confabulated or performative. Alternatively, one could try to cross-validate chain of thought monitors by checking whether tokens perceived as important by a chain of thought monitor also stand out to white box interpretability methods. End-to-end evaluations of monitorability. One could ensure monitorability directly, for example, by examining how effective chain of thought monitors are at catching the misbehavior of LLM agents in proxy environments. When is chain of thought monitorable enough to rely on as a load-bearing safety measure? Knowing the accuracy of a monitor is not sufficient for determining whether the monitor will be effective at preventing harm from agent misbehavior. For example, even a monitor with a high false positive rate could be used for flagging suspicious actions when it is cheap to resample from the model. Moreover, most risks might lie in scenarios where an adversary, a human attacker, or a misaligned agent is trying to evade monitoring. Evaluation of monitor effectiveness might need to account for such adversaries, for example, by involving a red team trying to stress test safety measures. What kinds of training time optimization pressure degrade chain of thought monitorability? Properties of the training process could have a significant effect on monitorability, but we still do not have a good understanding on what kinds and amounts of direct and indirect optimization pressure is permissible without significant degradation in monitorability. Can models obfuscate their reasoning on purpose? An obvious concern when using chain of thought monitoring as a safety measure is whether chain of thought would be less monitorable if models knew that their chain of thought is monitored from training or due to being told in the prompt. Researchers could stress test models to see if they are capable of hiding malicious reasoning even without training against a chain of thought monitor. What types of architectures reduce monitorability of chain of thoughts? Models that reason in continuous latent spaces naturally limit our visibility into their thought processes, absent any optimization pressure. We should investigate the extent to which various non-standard architectures degrade monitorability and under what conditions partial monitorability might still be preserved. For example, through hybrid approaches that maintain some visibility into reasoning while leveraging latent computation. How to construct better chain of thought monitors? Prior work focused on zero-shot prompting, less capable language models to work as monitors. Future work could explore ways of improving monitor performance by leveraging test time compute. For example, monitors could be based on a reasoning model, or they could be allowed to interrogate the agent by asking questions. Another line of work involves adversarial training of monitors against an agent that tries to hide its misbehavior. We're getting to a point where I'm like, why are we playing with the bots if we can't trust the bots? AI developers should track chain of thought monitorability of their models and treat it as a contributor to model safety. Many of the risks posed by highly capable AI agents would be much easier to address if these agents were interpretable. And despite promising progress in applying mechanistic interpretability, turning it into reliable, practical tools for overseeing LLM agents will require further research and breakthroughs. Given the unique opportunity that chain of thought monitorability presents, frontier AI developers should develop effective evaluations of chain of thought monitorability. Frontier model developers, as well as the broader research community, should prototype and converge on standardized evaluations and metrics with that reveal when chains of thought are sufficiently monitorable. Publish evaluation results in system cards when such evaluations exist. Once credible evaluations of chain of thought monitorability are available, developers should periodically run these evaluations on their models and report the results, methodology, and limitations in system cards of these models, unless and until such evaluations demonstrably lack safety value for their specific use cases. Use monitorability scores in training and deployment decisions. Developers should consider measures of monitorability alongside other capability and safety evaluations when deciding to train or deploy a given model. These decisions should then be based on holistic assessments of risk, which account for chain of thought monitorability, performance characteristics of monitoring systems, and estimates of models' propensity for misbehavior. For example, developers might consider whether to proceed with a novel model architecture that does not have monitorable chain of thought and then document their decision in the system card if the model is deployed. If monitorability degrades during training, developers might prefer to use an earlier model checkpoint to keep chain of thoughts monitorable. If process-based supervision dramatically improved alignment at the cost of a small decrease in monitorability, developers might decide reducing monitorability is justified. Another potential intervention for developers is to make the chain of thought visible, allowing users to observe and report issues. However, this could backfire. May lead to significant pressure to directly supervise the chain of thought to look safe and avoid prosaic legal and reputational risks, which may break monitorability as discussed in Section 2. Again, the quantum effect yet again. Accordingly, we don't make an explicit recommendation either way on this. We're just coasting along as well as you, even though we're the big LLM developers at the moment. Limitations. So while we focus on the opportunity presented by chain of thought monitoring, we stress there are additional limitations beyond those already discussed above. In cases where thinking out loud is not required, chain of thought monitoring can detect some misbehavior, but it does not by itself produce strong evidence of safety. Chains of thought can look benign if the malign reasoning can be done in activation, so a model can be misaligned without visible malign reasoning. Care must be taken and not to create a false sense of safety based on such monitoring. Monitoring for dangerous tasks that need reasoning may not catch all relevant harms. Some dangerous tasks may not require much reasoning, and as models become capable of more complex reasoning in their activations, fewer tasks will satisfy the externalized reasoning property. So again, as things get more competent and we're able to do more in like sort of zero-shot prompting, it's not going to have to invoke chain of thought reasoning, and therefore you're just not going to hear its thoughts because it's got it. It's handled it all in like one little opaque black box. Chain of thought monitoring may stop working in more advanced situationally aware models. Future models may become able to avoid detection by overriding their propensity to think out loud, and when reasoning is required, to deliberately obfuscate it. Yes, that's like when I try not to talk to myself all day in my office. Firm commitments to protect chain of thought behavior in its current form may trade off against more effective safety interventions. We find it plausible, though far from clear, that some forms of process supervision could substantially improve model alignment by effectively intervening on model reasoning. Research strategies that aim to unconditionally preserve chain of thought monitorability in its current forms may miss productive safety opportunities of this kind. For these reasons, we recommend investment into chain of thought monitoring only as an addition to existing safety research directions and not as a replacement. See, and I'm like, I like explainable AI, I like chain of thought, I understand we need other safety stuff, but um, yeah, I think we should have this in our models, especially those of us who are doing a lot more of discovery and things as opposed to the current black box some of our vendors are giving us. Anyway, in conclusion, all monitoring and oversight methods have limitations that allow some misbehavior to go unnoticed. Thus, safety measures for future AI agents will likely need to employ multiple monitoring layers that hopefully have uncorrelated failure modes. Chain of thought monitoring presents a valuable addition to safety measures for frontier AI, offering a rare glimpse into how AI agents make decisions. Yet there is no guarantee that the current degree of visibility will persist. And that's where I get worried, because it's like they get a little smarter and then poof, this is useless. Kind of like teenagers. We encourage the research community and frontier AI developers make the best use of chain of thought monitorability and study how it can be preserved. Yes, yes, please, please. Thank you all for coming together to share this little, I think it's a white paper. Anyway, let me know what you think. Should chain of thought be like a mandatory requirement in discovery system AI? And I don't know, any other AI that we are currently using on the regular? Oh, the hummingbirds are going nuts over my hummingbird bush. Well, at least somebody's having fun outside in this horrible Canadian wildfire summer.